On from this to subtractive forms, right? And subtractive forms, you might think of them as form, but you can also think of them as process. So this is Abu Simbel, all right, which actually got moved. So it's not in its original place. They flooded the Aswan Dam, and when they did, this would have been underwater, and that would have caused problems. So they actually moved it. But the way it was originally built, right, was that they took a mountain and they carved into the mountain, and as they carved, they left these shapes, and then they dug into it to create this, I don't know if it's a temple or a mortuary, right? But they dug into it. And that's subtraction. And it yields something that's got spatial character, but doesn't always have formal character on the outside. Kind of different, huh? Continuing on, biomorphic forms. So here we have two slides. One, Mr. Sphinx, right? Mr. Sphinx is like the I don't know if it's Corfu's head on a lion or what. Corfu was one of the pharaohs. I think it's Corfu. There's a bunch of those guys. At any rate, you can tell that stuff's kind of rounded, right? And then we have the columns that some people think of in different sort of ways, but that's supposed to represent a bundled reed. And so those shapes are sort of mimicking stuff that you see in nature. Okay? So that kind of is form. Now we're going to go on to another one of the topics from the very beginning called scale, right? And scale is an important thing in understanding architecture because generally it tells you how big something is, and you need to know how big it is in relation to something else. Sometimes that something else is your human body. So when you look at this big giant doorway compared to a human figure, you immediately understand how big that door is, right? It's a big door. It's like 2.5 stories. But if I was to take and hide the person, right, all of a sudden, hey, you can't tell how big that thing is, right? So scale becomes an important thing. The idea of human scale in relationship to something also kind of tells you just how big the thing is. So you can see this picture of one of the pyramids in Giza and just the size of the people that are on it. These things are huge. Okay? Enclosure. So we're going to talk about enclosure as we kind of go through some of the historic buildings. And as I mentioned, the idea of enclosure is kind of it's a little mixed because unlike these two sort of contemporary images where you see two buildings by an architect named Le Corbusier, they have glass, right? And they're using glass to let stuff in, and that creates a clear distinction between inside and outside. If the air conditioner's running and it's 100 degrees out, you're good in both of these rooms, right? If it's freezing cold outside, the heater's on, you're still good in these rooms. But what about if you were in a Greek temple and it's freezing outside? Well, it's probably freezing inside too, unless they got a fireplace or something going. And it's not very efficient because all that hot air is going somewhere. Okay? All right, next thing, path and circulation. So there are a number of different things to consider in path and circulation. One is the approach to something, the approach to a piece of architecture, how you move towards it. Another one is entrance. Any piece of architecture needs to have something that says, hey, this is where you enter. This is the main entrance. Configuration of path. So the idea of a path is whether you're going to be able to see everything down its length because it's a straight line, whether that path is going to be curved and serpentine or a perfect arc. A lot of those things become things that feed into how the architecture becomes organized later. The path-space relationships. So think about this building we're in, right? We have a path that runs right up the middle of it. And there are rooms to either side. And all the rooms empty out onto that center path. It's a simple corridor. So it's called a double-loaded corridor. Okay? And the form of the circulation space deals with, some of its sectional quality and how tall to how wide it is. Okay? So if we take a look, for example, at this room, some people would look at this room and say, well, it's square. Somebody else might say, well, I think it's a little wider than it is deep. But the proportions are not like the corridor, right? The corridor is like super long and really narrow compared to its length. This one maybe is, 1 to 1 or 1.5 to 1. That's the ratio of the two. And that deals with what a space lends itself towards as far as use. Okay? So circulation and approach. This is St. Peter's Basilica and the piazza that's out in front of it. All right, in Rome. I guess the Vatican is kind of over in here, I believe. Yeah, it is. It's over in there. I was there in summer. It was 95 degrees outside. There were thousands of people going into the Vatican to see God's finger, right? That up on the top of the Sistine Chapel. But they make you walk through miles of corridors, and you feel like you're a cow being herded through this corridor that's about this wide with just thousands of people all moving through it, looking at Renaissance artwork. And after you're about 20 feet into it, you just like, I want to get out of here, and there's no way out. You got to keep going in the herd. Yeah. Anyway, so one of the things that was interesting about this is the axial approach to it. There's a road out in front of it. It's pedestrian for a short ways, and then it's vehicular. But you can see St. Peter's Basilica and the dome from way down the street. And so the approach to it becomes kind of a ceremonious sort of thing. All right, so that's one of those topics. The next one is this idea of demarcating entrance. So this is a Japanese torii, okay? And that pretty much says, hey, come on in, right here. This is where you enter. You're not going to walk around and climb through the bushes. You're going to enter here and go up those steps, right? Same thing with this building. The building has a symmetrical elevation. This is an Egyptian temple. And it has right dead smack in the middle an opening. Okay? That's telling you, enter here. Now those are symmetrical axial arrangements. There's other ways to create the idea of entry. Path and circulation and the configuration of path. Sometimes the path and circulation is simple. It's a straight line. Other times it's not. And so this is the Acropolis in Athens. This is the religious center of the Greeks, the Athenic Greeks. There was a path to approach the Parthenon back here that was sort of circuitous. This building is called the Propylaea, right? Over here is the Caryatid porch and the Erechtheion. There's a number of different buildings up there that you'll sort of learn about. But there was this path that led up to the Propylaea, and the Propylaea was this gateway, and you entered in. And then, rather than walk straight up to the Parthenon, the entrance to the Parthenon, I believe, faced east, and so you came all the way to the back side of it to enter into the temple. Well, for the priests to enter into the temple. Okay? Here's another example of configuration of path. Anybody been to this? No? This is the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Fantastic, fantastic place. Depressing and sad at the same time, visually stunning, especially at night. At night, it's phenomenal. If you ever get a chance to go there, go to the Vietnam War Memorial at night. All right, but that one essentially is a long V, and each leg of the V points at the Lincoln Memorial, at Lincoln himself, or if the other leg points straight at the Washington Memorial. So as you walk down, as you're walking up this way, you see right at the end of the axis is the Washington Monument, and it's reflected in the wall as you walk up. Same thing when you come this way, you're looking right at the Lincoln Memorial. So, anybody know what this is? Who saw Men in Black? Anybody see Men in Black? Yeah? The first one? Remember when the guy runs around and he jumps off the edge of the building? Yeah, the Guggenheim Museum. This has a circuitous path. Yes, Will Smith wonders what those blinking eyes were doing. Let's keep going as we're running out of time. Proportion. So proportion, we already talked a little bit about that. It relates to how long something is to how wide it is, but it can also be about how the parts relate to each other and how certain proportions are linked up and taken to other parts of an object. Okay, so proportion can be something that's very simple. So proportion can be something that's very complex. There's also this notion of the golden section or the golden rectangle that's supposed to be a harmonious shape, all right, and it has a specific proportion that is exhibited throughout nature. So it's a form that is shown geometrically, but the sequence that creates it is something that's evident throughout nature. All right, and that's that. I managed to get through without anybody falling asleep. Let me stop this video, and then we will go to the other classroom. All right, go ahead and go to the other classroom.